You don't just miss her, you miss the feeling of being needed, of having a role, a rhythm, a reason to wake up and pretend everything was fine. Because even if it hurt, at least you knew who you were in that pain. And now, without her, without the chaos, you're left with silence, and silence makes you confront what you've been avoiding all along, yourself. Punchline. It wasn't her you lost. It was the version of you who only existed when she stayed. Most men think they're grieving her, but what you're really mourning is who you became to keep her, the compromises and the silence, the slow erosion of self-respect you called love. You stayed too long, not because you were weak, but because you were loyal to a version of you that needed to be needed. This isn't about blaming her. It's about facing you, the man you lost, and the one you're now being called to become. Not in rage, not in revenge, but in quiet, grounded clarity. Comment, I am my own power. Number 1, you loved stability and not her. You thought you missed her, but it was the version of you that made sense when she stayed. There's a moment, right after the silence sets in, where everything feels hollow, not painful, not even sad, just hollow, like the music stopped but the lights didn't turn off. You look around your life and it's all still there. The bed, the dishes, the routine, but she's not. And what you feel isn't heartbreak. Not really, it's disorientation, because it wasn't her you were addicted to. It was the rhythm, the consistency. It was waking up and knowing there was a text waiting, coming home and knowing someone was there, even if her presence felt distant. It was knowing who you had to be to keep the system running. You weren't in love with her. You were in love with the structure she gave your life, even if that structure was built on emotional eggshells. Even if the foundation was cracked, it was familiar. And for men like you, men who've lived through chaos, familiarity feels like love. It feels like safety. And so you called it love. You convinced yourself she was your person, that the tension was just passion, that the walking on eggshells was just intensity, that the way you compromised your voice was maturity. You twisted yourself into a shape that fit her world, and mistook that contortion for compatibility. But let's be honest, brother, how much of you was truly present in that relationship? How often did you silence your needs just to avoid another argument? How many times did you apologize just to restore the peace? Not because you believed you were wrong. You weren't in love, you were performing predictability. Predictability became your peace treaty. You showed up on time. You didn't ask too many questions. You stayed in line. You thought that would earn her loyalty. But love doesn't thrive in control. It breathes in authenticity, in presence, and you hadn't been present in a long time. You were managing her moods, her silence, her triggers. You became the emotional buffer between her chaos and your peace. And every day you did that, you lost a little more of yourself. You didn't crave her love. You craved the version of you that made sense when she was around. The version of you who had a role, a rhythm, a mission, even if that mission was just keeping her from leaving. And that's what hurts now. Not her, but the absence of the role you once played, the identity you built around being her man. Because when she left, she didn't just walk away from you. She took that version of you with her, the one you built around her expectations, the one who was always available, always agreeable, always one step away from himself. But now, There's nothing left to maintain. No more emotional weather reports, no more walking the line, just silence. And in that silence, a new man is being born. One who doesn't need structure to feel safe, one who doesn't need someone else to give his life rhythm, one who realizes that love isn't found in routine, it's found in truth. So here's your shift. You didn't lose love. You lost predictability. You lost the emotional cage that you'd come to confuse for home. And now you're standing in open space. Terrified, free, unclaimed. This is where it begins. This is where you learn to build a rhythm around you. Not her, not anyone. Because what you thought was passion was just program dependency. What you thought was love was just the illusion of safety. Let that illusion burn. Let it all fall down. The rituals, the routines, the roles. And when the ashes settle, you'll find a man who no longer confuses routine with love, a man who no longer fears his own silence, a man who no longer waits to be chosen to feel whole. Final truth, you didn't miss her. You missed the version of yourself that felt needed, but that man was a ghost. Now it's time to become real. Number 2, you were trying to be predictable, not powerful. She didn't fall out of love with you. She fell out of polarity with the man who stopped leading himself. Let me ask you something. When did you start shrinking? Not all at once. Not in a dramatic, obvious way, but slowly. Quietly. In the little things. When did you stop speaking your mind, not out of respect, but out of fear? When did you start calculating your words like landmines, not to protect the relationship, but to avoid waking her storms? You didn't call it fear back then. You called it compromise. You told yourself you were being mature, emotionally intelligent, safe. But what you were really doing was neutering your edge, the part of you that had presence, direction, command, and in its place, you gave her predictability. You adjusted, you adapted, you became easy to read, easy to keep, easy to put in a box and label secure. You traded mystery for management, leadership for compliance, polarity for peace. But here's the thing, there's no power in being palatable, there's no depth in being agreeable, and over time, she didn't feel safer with you. She felt less pulled by you because she didn't need another reflection. She needed a force. You weren't leading anymore. You were following her emotional cues, walking on invisible eggshells, tracking her moods like weather apps, and every time you bent to avoid friction, you told her one silent thing: I don't trust my own center. And if you don't trust it, why should she? See, women don't crave perfection. They crave polarity. They want to feel you as a grounded masculine presence, not as a mirror to their storm. But you gave her softness where you should have given structure. You gave her patience when you should have given purpose. You became predictable, and predictability, in the absence of presence, becomes invisible. It's not that she stopped loving you, it's that she couldn't feel you anymore, because you weren't showing up as you. You were showing up as the version of you you thought she wanted, always accommodating, always adapting, always pleasing. You became her emotional butler, not her man. But let's be real. You didn't do that out of love. You did it out of fear. Fear of conflict, fear of abandonment, fear of being too much. So you trimmed your edges, muted your instincts, turned yourself into something digestible. But the masculine isn't meant to be digestible. It's meant to be felt. A mountain doesn't shrink because someone else is uncomfortable with its height. It stands. Regardless, that's what you forgot. You confused safety with stillness, but you weren't still. You were silent. And silence, when it's coming from fear, doesn't breed trust. It breeds distance. So, here's your Stoic shift. You don't need to be predictable, or you need to be present. Powerful presence isn't loud, it's not controlling. It's not about having the last word. It's about knowing your ground and staying rooted in it, even when the storm comes. You're not here to be her emotional insurance policy. You're here to walk your path with purpose, to speak your truth with clarity, to hold your boundary not as a wall, but as a compass. And the man you're becoming now, he doesn't shrink to be chosen. He doesn't adapt to avoid being alone. He leads, not to control her, but to honor himself. That's the power she stopped feeling, and it's not too late to reclaim it. Not for her, not to win her, but for you. So the next time you show up, it's as the man who no longer trades truth for comfort, the man who can be felt, not just kept. Final truth. You became who she wanted, and lost who you were. It's time to return, not to her. Number 3, polarity died. When you abandoned self-respect, she didn't lose interest because you weren't enough. She lost respect because you kept abandoning yourself. There's a moment, a quiet one, when you look back and realize you saw it coming. Maybe not in the way it ended, but in the way you started disappearing. You let things slide, the raised voice, the silent treatment, the dismissive comments masked as jokes. You called it choosing your battles. You told yourself you were being mature, keeping the peace, holding the relationship together. But the truth is, you weren't choosing peace. You were choosing permission. You were waiting for her to validate that you were worth being yourself. And in the process, you betrayed that self. That's what killed the polarity. Not time, not comfort, not routine. It was the slow death of your own edge. The erosion of the boundaries that once made you a man she could feel. Because here's something you may not want to admit. You saw the red flags. You felt the knots in your gut, but you silenced them, not because you didn't know, but because you did. And knowing meant confronting, and confronting meant risking, and risking felt like loss. So you made a trade, your truth for her presence, your boundary for her comfort, your clarity for her temporary affection. You began to fold, not in one big collapse, but in tiny, imperceptible ways. You stopped calling her out, you stopped calling yourself forward, you stopped saying no when it mattered, and every time you swallowed your voice, she felt it. She felt the masculine energy dim, the polarity dissolve. The leadership go silent, and it didn't make her feel closer, it made her feel heavier. Because now she had to lead, and she didn't want to. She wanted to surrender. But how could she surrender to a man who couldn't even stand in his own truth? That's the psychology of it. When you abandon your self-respect to keep her, you don't just lose her. You lose the dynamic, the pull, the sacred tension that keeps love alive. Attachment wounds make you think that love is earned through sacrifice, that the less you ask for, the more you'll be given, that peace means silence, but real peace isn't the absence of conflict, it's the presence of truth, and your truth was buried. You didn't lose her because you weren't enough. You lost her because she couldn't feel you anymore, because the man she met, the one with direction, purpose, and spine, had been replaced with someone safe, predictable, controlled. But here's the Stoic shift. Respect is not given to the agreeable, it's given to the anchored, to the man who can hold his center, even when it shakes the ground, to the man who says, "This is my truth, even if it costs me you." And that's what you stopped doing. You stopped leading yourself. You stopped being felt, and in the absence of being felt, the spark faded. Not because she wanted more, but because she needed to feel your presence, not your compliance. You don't need to yell to lead. You don't need to fight to be felt. But you do need to stay rooted in yourself. You do need to remember, love without self-respect is just performance. And performance doesn't breed intimacy, it breeds exhaustion. So here you are now, raw, exposed. But there's a man rising in the rubble. Not the man who bends, not the man who waits for permission, but the man who remembers peace isn't found in keeping her, it's found in keeping you. Final truth, you weren't rejected. You were predictable, and that killed the spark. Let that truth sit. Let it sharpen you. And let this be the last time you abandon yourself to be loved. Number 4, you confused sacrifice with strength. You didn't stay because you were strong. You stayed because you didn't believe you were allowed to leave. Let me ask you, how many times did you confuse your exhaustion for nobility? How many nights did you fall asleep wondering what else you could give, how much more you could carry, before she finally saw the weight you held for her? You loved harder. You gave more. You bent further than anyone asked you to. You tried to fix her storms, as if love was measured by how much pain you could hold without breaking. And maybe it looked like strength from the outside. The way you held her when she pushed you away. The way you forgave her without an apology. The way you stayed, even when it hurt. Even when you were invisible. Even when you knew, deep down, that nothing you gave would ever be enough. But you didn't stay because you were strong. You stayed because somewhere in you, there was a little boy still trying to prove he's good enough to be kept. You weren't being powerful. You were being useful. And men are taught to mistake the two because we are conditioned to earn love, to fix, to solve, to rescue, to perform. If I do more, I'll be enough. If I bleed for her, she'll see my worth. If I carry her chaos, she'll finally choose me. But that's not love. That's desperation dressed up as devotion. That's your unhealed wound whispering, if I suffer well enough, maybe someone will stay. But listen, love does not require you to shrink. Real love does not ask for your silence, your sacrifice, or your surrender of self. And strength, true strength, isn't how much damage you can endure for someone. It's how clearly you can see when you're disappearing and still walk away. You called it love, but if love costs you your peace, your voice, your truth, then what you're giving isn't strength, it's self-abandonment. She didn't need you to bleed. She didn't need you to fix her storms. She needed a man who knew where he ended and she began, who didn't make her chaos his compass, who loved her without losing himself. But you wanted to be irreplaceable. So you overgave. You overfunctioned. You disappeared behind effort, thinking it would make her see you. But the more you gave, the more she pulled back, because you weren't offering your presence. You were offering proof that you deserved to stay, proof that you were valuable. And proof never satisfies the soul, only presence does. Here's your Stoic shift. You don't have to bleed to be worthy. You don't have to suffer to be chosen. You don't have to turn yourself into a savior to be loved. You're not a project manager for someone else's emotions. You're not a bandage for wounds you didn't cause, and you're not a strong man just because you stayed through something that broke you. Strength is knowing when to stop giving. Strength is knowing your limit and honoring it, even when it disappoints someone else. Strength is walking away, not because you're tired, But because you finally see that you don't need to be in pain to feel valuable, you weren't being strong, you were shrinking, quietly, silently, beautifully perhaps, but shrinking nonetheless. You gave love in the language of labor. But love isn't earned through exhaustion. It's felt in freedom, in clarity, in peace. So here's your final truth. You weren't weak for staying, but you weren't strong for it either. Now is the time to redefine what strength looks like. It's not sacrifice, it's self-respect, and it's yours to reclaim. Number 5. You attached to her chaos because you feared your stillness. It wasn't her that you kept chasing. It was the noise that kept you from hearing yourself. There's a silence that hits after she's gone. Not just the absence of her voice, but the deeper silence, the kind that creeps into your chest when the drama dies, and you're no longer busy trying to fix her, save her, please her, hold her together. The kind that forces you to sit with the one thing you've been avoiding all along, yourself. You see, it wasn't just the love you were addicted to, it was the movement, the friction, the emotional fireworks, beautiful, loud, and destructive. One moment you were on top of the world, the next, begging for peace. It felt like passion. It looked like intensity, but it was just chaos in disguise. A loop of reaction disguised as love, because her storms gave you purpose. Every argument was a mission, every silence a riddle, every outburst an opportunity to play the savior, and that felt like worth. It felt like identity. It gave you something to do, so you never had to stop and ask yourself what you actually felt. Her chaos wasn't the problem. It was your avoidance of stillness that made it irresistible. Stillness terrifies the man who hasn't made peace with himself, because when the noise stops, when no one's screaming or crying or pulling away, you're left with your own voice, your own unmet needs, your own unhealed wounds. And that kind of silence, that's a mirror, and most men aren't ready to look. So you made her storms your shelter. You attached to her chaos because it gave you a reason to avoid your emptiness. It made you feel useful. It kept your hands full, your mind distracted, your heart preoccupied. But the cost, you never got to be seen, only needed, and there's a difference. When someone needs you to hold them together, they don't have space to hold you. And you didn't realize that until the exhaustion set in, until you were fixing everything and being fed nothing, until you started disappearing inside of her dysfunction, thinking that's what love is supposed to feel like. But here's what you missed. The masculine doesn't thrive in noise. It thrives in stillness, in clarity, in the grounded solitude of a man who knows his own soul and doesn't need chaos. To feel alive, you were never meant to be her anchor. You were meant to be your own, and every time you lost yourself trying to stabilize her, you drifted further from your truth. You thought you were strong because you stayed, because you held it all together. But strength isn't measured by how much noise you can endure. It's measured by how willing you are to face the silence. To sit in the stillness and say, I don't need her chaos to feel like a man. That's the Stoic truth. Saving someone who doesn't want to be saved isn't noble. It's a distraction. You weren't healing her. You were hiding in her. Because fixing her was easier than facing you. Loving her was easier than loving the parts of you that still felt unworthy, and staying in the chaos. That gave you a role, even if it was killing your peace. But now, the chaos is gone, and the silence you feared has arrived, and this is where your healing begins. You no longer need someone to break so you can feel useful. You no longer need dysfunction. To feel alive, you no longer need a woman's chaos to avoid your own clarity. Stillness isn't empty. It's full of truth. It's full of power. It's full of you, the version you've been running from. So stop running. Final truth. Her. Chaos kept you from confronting your emptiness, but now you've stopped chasing. Now you're here, and here is where you finally meet yourself. Number 6, you needed her to validate who you were. You weren't looking for love. You were looking for a mirror that wouldn't break when you stared into it. Let me ask you something. When she looked at you, did you feel seen? Or did you feel safe from your own doubts? Because there's a difference. Being seen is vulnerable, but being validated, that's soothing. It quiets the questions you don't want to answer, the ones that start with, "Who am I when no one's watching?" You thought you loved her, but what you loved more was how she made you feel about you. You craved her attention not because it gave you connection, but because it gave you confirmation. Confirmation that you mattered, that you were enough, that you were someone worth loving. She became your mirror. And when she smiled, you saw someone valuable. When she touched you, you felt wanted. When she chose you, even if only temporarily, you felt real. But here's the thing about mirrors. They only reflect. They don't create. And when she broke, or pulled away, or stopped seeing the version of you that made sense to her, you didn't just lose her, you lost yourself, because you'd handed her the map, the compass, the keys to your identity. And now that she's gone, you're wandering through silence, trying to remember the shape of your own soul. Men like you don't chase women. You chase clarity. You chase certainty. You chase the feeling of being someone who finally makes sense, even if that sense is built on borrowed beliefs and emotional codependence. It wasn't her approval you needed. It was permission to feel whole. And that's what hurts now, not the absence of her touch, but the collapse of the image you saw in her eyes. Because without her, who are you? Without her smile, without her recognition, without her constant reminders that you matter, what remains? Stillness and questions, and the terrifying sacred task of defining yourself. You see, this is deeper than heartbreak. This is identity, loss. This is waking up and realizing the man you thought you were was just a reaction to her gaze. And here's the truth no one tells you. Men who haven't built themselves from the inside will always outsource their worth to women, to work, to performance, to being needed. You didn't fall in love with her. You fell in love with who you got to be around her. And when that role was taken away, you were left with the one thing you never learned how to cultivate: internal validation. But here's your stoic shift. When your worth depends on her reflection, you will always be chasing her moods, chasing her approval, chasing her love like a man trying to keep a fragile identity intact. And that isn't strength, that isn't love, that's dependence, dressed up in affection. So what now? Now, you build the version of you that no longer needs a mirror to feel real. You build the man who wakes up worthy, who doesn't flinch in the face of solitude, who knows himself in the quiet, and stands tall, even without applause, because she didn't define you. She distracted you from yourself, from your own reflection, from your own truth. You don't need her love to feel lovable. You don't need her eyes to see your value. And you don't need her voice to give you permission to exist. That power, the one you keep searching for in other people, it's been yours all along. Final truth. She didn't define you. She distracted you from defining yourself. And now you finally have the space to meet the man who is waiting to be seen by you. Number 7, you grieve the identity, not the person. It wasn't her you lost. It was the version of you who made sense when she was still choosing you. Let me ask you this. What hurts more, her leaving, or who you became when she did? You think you miss her, her laugh, her warmth, the way she looked at you when things were good. But the truth is, if you dig underneath the nostalgia, beneath the memories and the silent replays of what could have been, you'll find something else. You'll find that what you're really grieving is you. Not the man you are now, but the man you got to be with her, the one who had direction because she was the destination, the one who felt wanted, chosen, necessary. You had a role, a rhythm, a reason, and now you feel like a ghost in your own skin, like you're trying to remember how to walk without walking beside her. But this is the illusion, brother. The pain in your chest, it's not her absence. It's your ego mourning the death of the identity you built around her presence, because she wasn't just a partner, she was a mirror, and when that mirror cracked, so did the image of who you thought you were. You didn't just lose a relationship, you lost a version of yourself, the one who had answers, the one who had control, the one who believed that love, once earned, would always stay. And now, you're standing in a void, not because she left, but because the scaffolding of your identity collapsed with her departure. Breakups don't just sever connection, they dismantle illusion. The illusion that she was the answer. The illusion that you were complete in her arms. The illusion that stability was external, built on her validation, her presence, her choice to stay, but all of that was borrowed. None of it was you. That's why it hurts. Because now, in this silence, you're being forced to confront a question you never had to ask when she was there. Who am I? Without her. And that question, that's not weakness. That's the beginning of everything. That's the sacred unraveling of all that isn't real, so that what is can finally emerge. You see, your pain is sacred, not because it means she was your forever, but because it means something inside you is trying to wake up, and it needed the silence to do it. It needed the loss. It needed the disorientation, so that the man who was buried beneath her shadow could start to breathe again. This isn't about forgetting her. This is about remembering you. The version of you that was never dependent on her gaze to feel whole. The man who exists beyond being chosen. The one who doesn't disappear when someone else walks away. Here's your Stoic truth. This is not the end. This is the unbecoming. And unbecoming is brutal. But it's honest, and in that honesty there's freedom. You're not missing her, you're meeting you, the real you, not the man shaped by her presence, not the man who was only confident when he was needed, but the man who rises, now unclaimed, undefined, unbroken. So let the grief move through you, let it strip you bare, because what remains, when all the roles and routines fall away, is truth, and truth is always worth the pain. Final truth. You're not grieving. You're grieving the version of you that no longer exists, and that is the beginning of becoming someone you never imagined you could be. You've been through the storm, not just her leaving, but the quiet chaos that followed, the nights you couldn't sleep, the mornings that felt meaningless, the days when you questioned your worth just because someone else stopped seeing it. But here's the shift. the one that changes everything. You don't need her to come back. You don't need closure from her, or one last conversation, or the apology that never came. What you needed was you. And now you're beginning to remember. This pain, it didn't break you, it revealed you. It pulled away the noise, the roles, the performance, and brought you face to face with the man you'd forgotten. You see clearer now that love isn't about losing yourself just to be kept. That peace is found in honoring your truth, not in fixing hers. And that self-worth was never something she could give or take, because it was yours all along. So let her go, not with anger, not with pride, but with stillness, because you no longer chase what walks away. You no longer need to be understood to feel grounded. You've grown, you've evolved, and most of all, you've returned. Comment: I am not who I used to be. Subscribe if you're walking away in silence, not to prove a point, but to protect your peace.